right, everybody. Good morning slash evening slash afternoon slash night. I know we've got people coming in from a lot of different places today. This is our first class for the Christianity 101 course that we're doing here at Unfinished Community. You may notice me looking in kind of a bunch of weird different directions here. We did a demo test of this about like 6 months ago, and I've kind of improved the setup since then, but I'm still kind of figuring it out. So I apologize if I look or sound weird. I also will tell you guys right up front, we've been having some minor issues with our internet here at the church. So if things cut out, I apologize again in advance. But I am also creating a backup recording locally. So if things kind of just go pear-shaped, the lecture will still happen. It'll be recorded and I'll upload it later. So for those of you joining us online, which is everybody right now, because today the folks that are joining us in person aren't actually available, so it's really just you online folk today, in case anybody just walks in the door during. So I want to give you guys a quick brief as to what is going on here with the course. So this is our Christianity 101 class. I've been working on this for a little while. It's kind of a multi-purpose class. So we're doing these live streams here. The first portion of our class is just the live stream, just me, just telling you stuff. So I see already a number of you in the chat already talking to each other. Fantastic. I'm so glad to see it. That's where our conversation during the lecture is going to take place. So just like a good old Twitch streamer, I'm going to be referring to chat here, but I will be the only one who's on the kind of public-facing portion of this outside of text conversation. And during this first kind of 30-minute chunk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the topic of the day. Now, those of you who are on the Discord server already have the link for this, but I've also set up a Google Classroom, which is going to contain links to every lesson. It's going to have outlines for the lesson. It's going to have pretty much anything I can think and have time to put up in advance of and or during and possibly after the lesson that might be useful to you. So all of that's there. The link for that is shared on the Discord server. Because it's kind of harder to control who gets in a Google Classroom, I'm keeping the link there. So if you're not on the Discord server and you want to join the Google Classroom for this class, just join the Discord server. Like, we are a Discord community anyway, and we're always super happy to see people on the server for conversation anyway. So just come join us there and you'll get everything you need. I will say we've got Courtney, our beloved co-host of Back to Basics, and our VP who's poking around in the chat as well, and will be handling any questions in the moment for me. So I'm going to say big thank you to Courtney for helping out with this, especially last minute. All right, so also I do want to note that for those of you who are taking the option to take this class as a candidate to be a new member of the church, first off, fantastic. Please let me know that you're doing that. In the Google Classroom, we will be having a couple of very simple assignments after every lesson. Just to kind of check that you're here, that you're participating, that you're kind of involved. There's also a little bit of information we need to collect from people who are being the new members for us. That's all on Google. And I mentioned this in the assignments too, for some of the personal information collection that we have to do for new members, if you're not comfortable putting that in through the Google setup, I get it. Shoot me an email or something and we'll arrange a way to get it to you through more secure channels. We've got a few of them here. I will also say that, and again, this is all in the assignment in the Google Classroom too, any and all information that we do collect from members or potential members of our community is stored offline on a solid state hard drive that is kept in my bag over here and in the church building, which, for those of you who don't know, is located in Japan and is the property of a Japanese congregation under a Japanese senior pastor, which means, among a number of other different things, that it is not accessible by, shall we say, agents of the United States government who feel like getting handsy about church personal data when they're looking for members of certain communities that they wish to have words with. So there is a certain degree of security that we have by virtue of our location. And I do take as great a pains as I am able to keep everybody protected and safe in our community, because I know a lot of you are not in the most stable of positions. Last but not least, as I alluded to earlier in the video, we've got kind of an interesting setup here. I already realize I'm sharing the wrong window. We've got a very interesting setup here. This is new. for me, the way we're using this. I've got a whiteboard app set up on the side there, which you can see I have just now switched to. And you get to enjoy my terrible handwriting, but this is how the professory folk do this, so that's what I'm going to do. So I will be going through the lesson. I'll be writing stuff on the whiteboard there. The whiteboard will be more visible as we get into the lesson. So for now, I want to kind of cover a couple things with you real quick. This course is, as designed, a 17-lesson class for those who are taking it as new members. It is a 14-lesson class for those who are not. We're setting this up with the theory, and this may change, because this is our first run at the class. The theory is that this is going to run once a month the way we're doing it now, where we have a live stream, a conversation, interactions, and all of that fun stuff. However, in between each monthly meeting, I'm going to try to pop off the next lesson as just a video. So there'll be a asynchronous lesson in between synchronous lessons, and so we're going to kind of double up going forward like that. God willing, I will be able to keep up with that pace, and we won't have any problems, but if we do, I'm sorry, it's our first time doing this. Our list of lesson topics, again, is posted as kind of a bare bones syllabus in the Google Classroom. I'm going to go over them with you real quick, just so you know what we're going to be doing and what we're going to be covering going forward. Lesson 1, which is what we're going to be covering today, is our Introduction to Church History, Denominations, Cults, and Crazies. I'm going to give you a very bare bones walkthrough of basically from Jesus to where our church is now. I'll point out in very general terms kind of where other churches and denominations come out to it, or where ones that you may be familiar with don't come out of the church. Spoiler alert, that's going to be a very fun conversation. Lesson 2, we're going to be starting our conversation on Bible translation. We're going to talk about where the Bible as we know it came from, how did we get the books we have, how were some of these decisions made, and why is any of that important? Lesson 3 is our second part of Bible translations, Clobber verse Boogaloo. Yes, we're going to be taking a specific look at some of the clobber verses and some of the kind of generic ways in which a lot of different clobber verses have been intentionally misinterpreted over the last insert number here of years. Lesson 4, we're going to be looking into interpretation, what we in the theological circles call hermeneutic. How do we figure out which way of looking at the Bible is quote unquote correct? Mind you, there isn't really a correct per se, but how do we make the determinations when there isn't a provable academic single way to do it? Lesson 5, that's going to be the big scary one for a lot of folks. That is sin, salvation, and the doctrine of total depravity. How does that work? What the heck? Oh my actual God, this is terrifying. Don't worry, it's not actually as bad as many of you have been taught. We'll get there in time. Lesson 6, Revelation, the experience, not the book. We will not be talking very much about the book of Revelation in this class because, spoiler alert, it's not that important. Lesson 7 is the sex lesson. Yes, we will be talking about this, and that YouTube video will probably be flagged. I'd be worried about it being demonetized, but we're not actually making any money as yet on YouTube or really much of anywhere yet, so I'm not too worried about that. Lesson 8, we're going to be talking about creation. Who is God? What did God do? What is all of gestures broadly this? And what's it for? Lesson 9 is kind of in review, the work and person of Jesus Christ. He's kind of a big deal to us. We are going to be covering what he talked about. Lesson 10, the Holy Spirit. Our subtitle for that lesson is just what? That's pretty much what it is. It's our talk about the eldritch God version of the deity, which we call the Holy Spirit. Lesson 11, Imagio Deity, humanity as the image, or Imagio Deity, Imagio Dei, humanity as the image of God. Lesson 12, sacraments, baptism, communion, and all the other stuff that's kind of sacrament adjacent for us Protestant folk, but is definitely sacramental for our Catholic friends. Lesson 13 is where we get into polity, denominational structure. How does our denomination work? How are we organized? What in the name of actual God is a pastor? And what is the difference between all of these different titles I've heard? Oh my God, I'm so confused. That's going to be lesson 13. And lesson 14, we will be ending on the same place where I honestly try to end every worship service. Hope. What is our hope? Where is our hope? And what in the name of Almighty God does hope look like? That's lesson 14. Now, for those of you taking this as a new member course, as I said, we've got those 3 extra lessons at the end. Those are statement of faith workshops. Now, those of you who aren't taking this as a new member class, you won't be restricted from these. If you want to join us in researching and understanding how statements of faith work and why they're written that way, and maybe even write your own, even if you're not trying to be a member, still good practice, you're welcome to join us. However, those 3 are required for those who are trying to join the church, because one of the last statements, one of the last parts of the membership process is kind of making your own statement of faith. Those of you who joined in our last batch with our very bare bones new members class, that's what those questions were about. They were just kind of walking you through the real bare bones basics of a statement of faith. But we're going to actually work on drafting a proper one together. Part 1 of the Statement of Faith workshops is historical creeds. So we're going to be looking at all of those old creeds you hear people talking about all the time. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. What the hell are they? Why do they matter? That sort of thing. Then we will be moving into the lesson 16, the second of our workshop pieces, modern creeds. I know a number of people in our community have heard me talking about the Belhar Confession, of which I am a very big fan. That one is going to come up in modern creeds. It's probably the one we talk about the most. So tune in for that one. And lesson 17, our final lesson for the workshops, is part 3, putting it in your own words. That's going to be as much of a language workshop as anything. I know a lot of us have kind of come from backgrounds that have taught us that we need to express everything faith-based in Christianese. We need to have like proper phrasing and words and stuff for that. You don't. Mostly we're going to be deconstructing that weirdness. So be prepared for that. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say, well, this is kind of a general purpose video, and I'm going to tone down my usual fairly profane and irreverent self for educational purposes. I am going to say that if your statement of faiths do include certain 4-letter words, I ain't going to complain. I might throw in a few myself. So don't even necessarily worry about that. So I think that covers a lot of the basic introduction to the course stuff. So now it's time for us to get into the history of the Christian church. What are we? Where do we come from? What are we doing? Now, the piece that I have to start out with, and that we have to wrestle with, especially today, is that we do in fact come from the Jewish tradition. Now, there's a line here that I need to make because there's a whole heretical branch of Christianity called Christian Zionism that does not make this distinction. But just because we came from the Jewish tradition does not mean we are Jewish. We are a separate thing, and we no longer share their tradition, their religious environment, and we don't get to just take stuff from them whenever we want. That's considered anti-Semitic. We don't do that here. Insert Black Panther gif as appropriate. Now, just because we're not that doesn't mean that we don't take a lot of our understanding from the Jewish tradition. It doesn't mean that we don't look to them for guidance, particularly on Old Covenant, Old Testament reading and interpretation. In fact, longtime followers of our hit podcast / video series with literally tens of listeners / watchers on some occasions may know that I regularly use the work of Robert Alter and other Jewish theologians in parsing the Bible, because it's important, because that text is ours in the sense that it's part of our canon, but we didn't make it, and it didn't come from us. We have incorporated it. And so in so doing, and in looking to those parts of our background, we need to be respectful of those and defer to those for whom that is still a living part of their religious activity today, and not just a historical document as it mostly is for us. So yeah, anti-Semitism, we don't do that here, but that is where we begin. So that is a balancing act we're going to be doing a lot as Christians, so be ready for that. So now I'm going to pop over to our whiteboard here. Take a look. Ta-da! Now you can see my terrible artwork, but I did draw a cute little bear, so I hope that helps a little bit. Now I'm going to be paging between the whiteboard and the broadcast software as we do this to make sure that everything I'm writing appears on screen. So I apologize in advance for things that might well look a little bit weird. So right off the bat, we are starting with the head of the church, which is a fellow you may have heard of by the name of Jesus. Now, this is an important distinction to start with in our church history, because you got a lot of folk that start arguing about, where does our church come from? Is it from the Catholics? Is it the Pope? Is it all these other things? No, it's Jesus. One of the fundamental points of every branch of the Christian church, from the Catholics all the way down to us Reformed folk, is that Jesus is the head of the church. And taking a look at the chat here, you were really wondering what sort of animal that was. So was I. I'm usually a better drawer when I'm not using a new digital tablet, but I'm also not that great of a drawer. Still, tried to make a cute bear for you also. Oh well. Anyway, Jesus is the head of the church, and it is from Jesus that our religion, our faith, our institutional practice derives. Now, it's important to know we're talking about the institution of the church. And all the different bifurcations, all the different branches on this Christian tree that are going to come up, all of them are effectively about us trying to figure out how to better follow Jesus. So every institution is just a different take on how best to follow Jesus, but they all trace back to and hold Jesus as the head of the church. So fun fact, if you are attending a church and they are talking about a certain orange crazy person as the head of the church, you're not in a Christian church. Very quick, easy way to tell the difference. So Jesus is where the church begins. Now, what we're going to do from here is we're going to start going institutionally through history, because after Jesus, he does the whole death, resurrection, ascension thing, and then we get the first church. Now, the first church is in Jerusalem. A-L-E-M. Yes, my handwriting is terrible, and yes, a lot of other things. So our first church is in Jerusalem. Now, this is important because, as most of you may have noticed, some 90% of the New Testament, 100% outside the Gospels, focuses on the church that isn't in Jerusalem. And you may be wondering why that is. If you're following along in our outline, you're going to see, well, I'll talk for a minute here about leadership, but you're going to see a little spoiler as to what happens next. But right now, in this early church, there is some debate about who's in charge. Now, traditionally, it is thought that Peter is kind of Pope number one. But I'm going to put a big question mark there, because there is also scholarly research that says good old Mary M., Mary Magdalene, is also number one. Now, I'm not going to get into this a lot, but look, we all know how misogyny works. We all know how dudes have been throughout history and also today, and for a number of you probably this week, or perhaps even this morning. Dudes be wacky, y'all. We not be the best. So the isolation of Peter as kind of Pope number one and the head of the church has been linked to this kind of sense of male-only dominance. But there are a number of different schools of thought that place certain exchanges between Jesus and Peter and Mary as being indicative of them being given a joint leadership of the church, effectively two first popes. Now, we have no record to say how true that might be or how true that might not be, because, well, 2,000 years of saying, oh yeah, definitely the dude. I tend to think that given the way Jesus operates, given the way God operates, given the constant influx of marital analogies, it honestly makes more sense to me that Jesus would have set a male and female leadership to act in tandem rather than to set up a kind of unicameral leadership structure for the church. Of course, then, We don't know, and we can't give a clear answer to that. Not that it matters, because we don't follow the papal system anyway, but it's still a little bit of a fun note. So we have that happening, and then the next thing that happens historically is everybody. Oh, hang on, I keep hitting the button here. Everyone dies. Now, this isn't just a time thing, it is because of Romans. Now, you'll forgive me because in being in something of a hurry, I haven't written down the actual date, but I think it's the late 90s, maybe around about 100. There are, actually, honestly, post-Jesus on the way through those next 100 years, there are a number of different Jewish rebellions against the Romans. Now, at this period of time, the followers of Christ hadn't really quite decided on being their own religion yet. They were followers of Rabbi Jesus. In effect, they were forming themselves as a distinct school within Judaism, some say, which I think makes sense. Jesus himself being a rabbi of the Hillel school, operating in contrast with the Shammai school, which were the Pharisees we have written about in the Bible. It's a lot more nuanced and distinct than that, but I'm not going to get into that at the moment. So at the time, you've got that all happening. So they stay based in Jerusalem. You've got Peter and I think later James, who are kind of effectively running the church in Jerusalem. And you've got these Jewish rebellions popping out. And then you got the last one, the Bar Kokhba revolt, after which the Romans say, okay, you don't get to go home and you can't stay here. Everybody out. No more Jews. Jews are gone. You're just not going to be a thing anymore. And they raise the temple and they send everybody out, which begins the very, very long and very, very painful period we call the Jewish diaspora. But what we don't talk about so much in Christianity, and quite frankly we should talk about more, is the fact that the original Christian church, the very first church, was in Jerusalem and was obliterated along with everybody else. The destruction of the Second Temple included the destruction of the first church and all its basic records. So everything we have from here on out is effectively secondhand. And the majority of what's left comes from people outside, and the people outside that leave the most records are, you guessed it, missionaries. So our missionaries are the ones who are keeping most of the records outside of Jerusalem. And yeah, so they're what's left. They didn't get blown up. And chief among our missionaries is a guy you may have heard of by the name of Paul. Now, Paul is a guy. We have a lot of mixed feelings about Paul in Christendom, mostly because he's the major source. Like, he was a prolific writer, he was constantly sending letters, and he was going everywhere. And when the OG church was being kind of isolated and up until its raising, he was doing his own work. Now, it's worth noting that Paul, even before his conversion, Paul was a Jewish extremist off of the Shammai school particularly, who converted and became basically a Christian extremist. He was an evangelical missionary back before either of those things were really things. So a lot of what he was doing was going to other places, founding churches. He had zeal and passion for Christ, and not always in good ways. So a lot of what we read on Paul is based on his particular take on Christianity, and which is why you get a lot of weirdness, like him saying, yeah, but nobody should ever get married, or women should just shut up. Like, no, you have a mix of him doing contextual things that made sense in context, plus him just being a profoundly weird dude. And he made the deliberate choice, and you'll forgive me for not remembering exactly where, but in the book of Acts, he decides not to stay with the church, even after he's told he should do that. He decides to go his own way. He's, in a very real sense, an early breakaway. So that's kind of where our information about the church goes. But at the same time, we have Peter, who also gets to Rome and is Basically, he gets to Rome. He founds the church. We have a succession of popes. I'm just going to write many popes, or mammy. If I definitely did not do that. Pardon my terrible handwriting. Many popes. All right, so we have many popes, and basically the founding of Rome is now the center of Christianity. Wow, my handwriting is terrible. I do hope you will forgive my terrible handwriting. But this is the beginning of Roman Christianity. Now, Roman Christianity goes through effectively two phases. And it's important for us to be able to tell the differences. We have persecuted church. Keep hitting the button on this pen. Persecuted church. Now, this is a period in history where there's some historical debate to how intense it was. The stories of Christians constantly being fed to lions are a bit overblown. But they were definitely executed constantly. They were dehumanized. They were treated as the scum of the earth. Roman propaganda from the period paints Christians as being subhuman leeches that don't deserve even the basic treatment of kindness. They should be killed on sight. They are responsible for all of the ills of society. Folks from the LGBTQIA community, immigrants, any of this sounding familiar? We do that to anybody who's an outsider. The Romans were doing it long before America was even a thing, and Christians were, at that period, the butt of that. We were very much the subjects of that to varying degrees, sometimes overblown, sometimes not. Attendees of our Revelation Bible study will have heard about how St. John of Patmos, the author of the book of Revelation, which we're not going to talk about a lot, was one of the wealthier guys who managed to get an exile rather than straight up killed during this period. However, after a time, we get a fella by the name of Constantine. And you may be familiar with him. Because he was played by Keanu Reeves in that one movie. No, you get him because he was the emperor that converted. And again, there is some debate over just what this conversion looks like. Historically, it's said that he saw a sign from God in the heavens that said, "Conquer by this," which does weirdly line up with certain odd astrological and commentary phenomena that did happen right about that exact same time. However, it was also an extremely useful political move for him to take this external kind of outside religion, make it the state religion, and then kind of promote it super hard as a means of kind of wrestling with population control over the populace. Again, definitely not something we've seen today, spoiler alert. So Constantine converts, and now we have Christianity as the state religion. So now we have church. Church equals state. We have effectively our first theocracy. The emperor rules from a Christian perspective. The church has functional dominion over everything. And now we start laying the groundwork for what is and is not Christian as its own functional religion. This is where we start to see breakaways. I'm not going to list every one of them, but I will give you a few of them. Some of our most famous breakaways are Arianism. Arianism is a belief, interestingly enough, founded by a guy named Arian, which is the belief that Jesus was basically a high-tech God golem, a kind of a homunculus that was made by God but wasn't actually divine in and of himself. That's a fun one. And we also have, and this is another one, perhaps a more well-known one, which we will talk about a few times. Gnosticism. And without getting again into too much detail, Gnosticism is a form of belief that says there is secret hidden revelation in the Bible that only the truly wise and devout who read it in just the right way and do all the right calculations will know, but everyone else is just not privy to this information. Only the truly sacred and holy can find the real hidden secret Bible code. Again, it's amazing how some of these things come back, isn't it? But at the time, those were some of the earliest things that the whole church looked at and said, yeah, no, get out. Just get out. You, go. No, none of that. None of that. That was basically what this early period of the church was. It's at this time that we get the Apostles' Creed and later creeds as well, which, spoiler alert for the end of the course, were written very carefully to specifically exclude these new kind of cultic belief systems. Side note to my side note, expulsion from the church because you were a heretic didn't just mean that you were kind of forgotten about. A lot of our Arians continued moving out. Some of them reformed, some of them didn't. But a lot of the Christianity that went through the Middle East and on into Asia originally began with the Arians and later some of the Gnostics who worked their way all the way out into China. And even, it was about 5-6 years ago, we did find records of some Arians who actually managed to make it here to Japan. So in a sense, since the very beginning, the first export of Christianity has been our heretics. Yay. So after that, we get basically a lot of debate over who's right. The church is the state. But effectively, at this point, we have what I'm going to call the unified church. Now, as a spoiler alert for those who see where things is going, one of the terms for unified that we use a lot is unified or universal. It means Catholic. Now, we're coming up now on our first big schism, which is going to happen not necessarily as a result of theological debate, but as a result of institutional debate. Because what happens next is this. Rome falls. So at the time, Rome falls, and we have the church in 2 locations. And this is going to be our first real breakaway. We have the church in Byzantium, which is the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. And the church in Byzantium, their bishop, also called a patriarch, their bishop patriarch sees the fall of Rome and decides pretty much, okay, well, I guess I'm the Pope now. At the same time, we have Rome. Wow, that was a bad R. We have over in Rome, where the empire has fallen, but the Pope, who is the Bishop of Rome, decides that he's in charge of the church. And so we have our first major conflict, the Bishop of Rome versus the Bishop of Byzantium. Bishop of Rome calls himself the Pope, the Bishop of Byzantium calls himself the Patriarch, and the debate is basically over, well, the Roman Empire is gone, so which one of us is heading the church? Well, the Roman Empire is not actually gone, it's just cut in half, and its new capital is at Byzantium, so that's where the argument goes. And this is the point at which I have to tell you that in the interests of both time and sanity, I am simplifying a ridiculous number of things. So in short, our folks over in Byzantium, they become what is known as the Orthodox Church. We are not going to continue down that line because our church line continues down through Rome and the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, who decided that, yeah, the Roman government may be gone, but the church is still here in Vatican City. We're going to keep doing the thing. So that continues onward, and following the Bishop of Rome and all that, we basically have a, and I'm going to be as simple about this as I can. Hang on, lost my pen here. Lots of stuff happens. In the interest of our own church history, I am not going to spend a great amount of time on everything that happens between the fall of Rome and the stuff that we're doing next. Literally don't know what just happened here. I did a thing and I'm not happy with it. Okay, whatever. So lots of stuff happens. I'm not going to spend any more time on the stuff that happens in between, but this is where church as state really starts to stretch its legs. We get things like constant conflict between our various popes. We get like the banquet of chestnuts. You've heard me talk about that, where one particular young pope summons together all of his bishops, throws as many chestnuts on the floor as possible, and then pays half the prostitutes in Rome to crawl around looking for chestnuts. You can imagine how much fun the bishops had with that. There's a lot of weirdness that goes on during the time of church-state unity. But this continues and corruption spreads through the church until 1,000 years or more passes, and we get to, oh, hang on. We get to, oh, okay, stop being weird. All right, so we get to the Reformation. Now, the Reformation, my own bad handwriting notwithstanding, is where we get a Catholic priest by the name of Martin Luther. You may be familiar with him. And the whole nailing the theses to the door, there is some argument over whether he actually nailed them to the door or just kind of submitted them in writing to his boss. Who knows? Still ancient history for us at this point. But basically what it boils down to is Martin Luther was absolutely done with the corrupt ways in which the church was doing business. One of the main things was the selling of indulgences, would basically, pay us money and we'll forgive specific sins. So you could buy them in advance. You say, hey, I want to do a murder. How much is it going to cost me to get forgiveness for that? And when the church is the state, that gets to be pretty big problem. And so I'm going to hyper simplify centuries worth of conflict here, and basically say that out of this period called the Reformation, we get effectively two schools of church. And what we get here is the Lutherans and the Reformed Protestants. Now, the primary difference, and there are many differences here between the two, between the Lutherans and the Reformed Protestants, is that the Lutherans were like, let's get rid of the indulgences, but let's keep worship and institutional structure pretty much the same. We're gonna say that the indulgences and the corruption was the issue, but everything else is salvageable. And the Reformed Protestants were like, nah, bad roots, y'all. Like, I think we have kind of seen the natural evolution of this system, and I don't like where it went, so let's go ahead and start over from scratch. That's mainly the difference between the two. There are other theological issues and arguments between the two, but effectively those are the two halves of those who protested the church. So Lutherans are one half of the Protestant church that followed Luther in changing just a little bit, but keep everything else. And now we've got the Reformed Protestants who are just like, no, let's change all the things. Now, you may be wondering at this point, where exactly do the Anglicans come in? There is some debate about this. Some argue that Anglicanism is connected to the Protestant Reformation. Most everything I've read says that the Anglican split was informed by the Protestant Reformation, but it's largely its own split because king equals pope now. King wants a divorce. The church is not going to allow it. And so, oh dear. So the church is not going to allow it. King wants a divorce. Church says no. King says yes. King says, I'm the Pope now. And voila, we get the Anglican Church. And again, oversimplifying it. But I am going to go ahead and note that and this is for much later on, there are effectively two versions of Anglicanism we should be aware of, and there's just general Anglicanism. And then we also have the version of Anglicanism that lives and functions in the USA, known as Episcopalian. Now, again, I really have to stress that I'm hyper-simplifying things in the interest of time, realizing that I'm now already a fair bit over where I said I would be for time. But there's a lot to cover here. So we're not going to follow down the Anglican street here because we're not Anglican. And we're not going to follow down the Lutheran street here as well because we're not Lutheran. We are instead going to continue down the street with our Reformed Protestant folks. Now, again, going to oversimplify them. You got guys like Zwingli, you've got a whole bunch of other folks, but effectively you have Reformed Protestantism goes to lots of other places. And Reformed churches begin making their own institutional systems in all these other places. And so, yeah, they kind of form their own denominational systems. And so we get things like, and these are going to be the examples I'll use, the Reformed Church of Scotland. Oh, wow, that is terrible. And my personal favorite, the Dutch Reformed Church. Now, the Reformed Church of Scotland is one of the examples I use because the next kind of defining characteristic about these churches is where do they go next? And when we go to the USA, they take on different names. So the Reformed Church of Scotland becomes known as Presbyterian. The Dutch Reformed Church becomes known as the Dutch Reformed Church. The Dutch Reformed Church of the United States, and eventually it breaks away from the Dutch Reformed Church entirely and calls itself the Reformed Church in America. I'm going to slide back up here just a minute, and I'm also going to note that the Dutch Reformed Church went other places as well because, hey, just like our English folks, the Dutch were also some pretty serious colonialists. And so the Dutch reformers also went to South Africa, and that's where we get the Dutch Reformed Church of South Africa, which we will come to later on because those are the guys who wrote the Belhar Confession. So that will be important later. That's a Mauska tool we'll take advantage of at a later point. But as you may have noticed now, we've gotten all the way down to the bottom here, and we have arrived at the Reformed Church in America, which us. The Reformed Church is us. That is where we are as a congregation. And so, over the years in the United States, this church has done a great number of things. I don't know how I managed to do that, but there we go. So it's done a great number of things in a great number of different places, some good, some bad. There have been breakaways from the RCA, including the CRC. Hang on. Bad handwriting again. The CRCNA. Rewrite that because, man, my handwriting is terrible. The CRCNA, the Christian Reformed Church of North America, or our new quote-unquote friends, the Association of Reformed Churches. These are conservative split-offs of the RCA. The CRCNA is recently most noteworthy for their decision to basically eat their young. They have gay people in their church, and they decided to make being gay a crime and went after every church or organization in their denomination that even thought about supporting members of the LGBTQIA community. It's been brutal. The RCA has been taking in, our own classes have been taking in churches that have been affected by this and are trying to flee that denomination. The ARC is a breakoff of our own denomination recently that happened only a few years back, where all of our conservative folks wanted to outlaw doing anything with the gays and do basically what the CRC is doing now, and the majority of our denomination said, no deal, not doing. And so a whole bunch of them left. And so that's basically what we have. And that gets us to where we are now. Now, you may have noticed I did not mention a few very specific groups. One of the groups I did not mention were the Baptists. And so I'm going to bring them up now. The Baptists are right around the Reformation, plus or minus, and they come from what are called the Anabaptists. And they kind of schismed, kind of didn't. They were kind of I won't use the term parachurch movement because that's more modern, but they were kind of their own upspring thing that was focused on the idea that only adults could get baptized. And so they kind of became their own thing. There's a big kind of question mark as to exactly how that connects there. There's argument and debate about where that comes from, but that gives rise to certain types of modern Baptists. Now, where this gets interesting is that this whole in the USA portion from here, we also have a number of different movements that kind of just happened in the USA, which is another thing called US. Hang on, did I lose that? Okay, good. All right, we've got US Baptists. Now, these are effectively separate things, but in the U.S. they start to muddle together a little bit to the point where nowadays we've got Baptist churches, some even within the same structured denominations, some of which can trace themselves back to early Anabaptists, some of which kind of are up to this up-and-coming movement within the United States. It's a bit of a muddied origin, but for the most part, we love them, even though they can get weird sometimes. Seeing Courtney here just now in the text. Yeah, the Dutch were horrific conquerors. Pay no attention to the last name on my title card here, but yes, they definitely were. So in the USA, we also have kind of a couple of movements we're going to pay attention to here, one of which is Wesleyanism, which is kind of the first of the more legit kind of American variations on Christianity, and it gives rise to what we now call Methodism. Again, I am oversimplifying things entirely. That is still seen as being connected because its founders did come from branches of Reformed Christianity, even though they went in what I would argue are fairly odd directions, but they're still kind of part of the family. But now, where things get interesting is from this whole in the USA section. I'm going to draw this line way over here, because we have this big thing that we're going to call cults. Now, there were a lot of cults that were basically expelled from Christianity that have been functioning and doing terrible things within the Christian environment in America. A couple of the early ones you may recognize. Puritans and Pilgrims. To borrow a phrase from George Carlin, folks that were so uptight the British kicked them out. They were actually considered heretics by both the Reformers and the Catholics of the time. They were considered a cult. But they took root here, and they started kind of growing their own thing. They never really formed outside of their own community much in terms of organizational or denominational structure, but what they did do is make a whole bunch of weird theology. And as a result of our kind of cultural worship of them as the founders, it created this cultic miasma, I would call it. just a collection of weird ideas, weird individuals, all kind of dancing around the outskirts of Christianity. This is where we get Pentecostalism comes out of this mess. Mostly. Now, where it gets weird is that Pentecostalism does also have some connection to kind of this side of things too. It's the one place where, oh dear, it's the one place where all of kind of cultic stuff and legit stuff kind of flow together with the Pentecostals. It's not, there's a whole argument about whether Pentecostalism counts as legit Christianity or not. I have friends who are Pentecostals and who are great people. I have known people who are Pentecostals and are absurdly terrible, and Pentecostalism has contributed to a large chunk of what evangelicalism is today. I am neither qualified nor willing to get involved into the debate about whether that particular formation constitutes legit, because there are arguments on multiple sides that all make sense. But what I'm going to focus on here is the string of things that come out of here, the cultic miasma of random weird beliefs dancing around the fringe. Some of them you may be familiar with this. Biblical literalism, Zionism, or Christian Zionism, at least. So biblical literalism, Christian Zionism, dispensationalism, rapture theology, what's the term that we use for that? Eternal conscious torment, that God torments happily everyone who disagrees with God. All of these are cult theologies dancing around the fringes. And for the most part, as many of you who are elder millennials and older may remember from when we were young, nobody really gives them a lot of credence. But we do start to see certain jumps, like I can imagine the chat's going to go nuts on this one. C.I. Scofield was one of the early dispensationalists. Him and Darby as well. These guys take a lot of that stuff. Scofield is particularly famous for creating the Scofield Reference Bible, which kind of lumps all of this stuff together into making its own version of the Bible. And that's where we get all of the end of the world theology. You can figure out the exact day and the hour if you just do the calculations from Daniel and cross-reference it with this one line from Revelation plus these two guys from Thessalonians. That nonsense all comes from there. And again, on its own, it's weird, it's crazy, it's not part of Christianity. We kicked this stuff out long ago. It arose, we took one look at it and said, not us. You want to stick with that? That's a you thing, but you don't be part of the church and be that. All of those were kicked the hell out by everybody. We all said absolutely all of the no to that. And so it's, as cults do, dancing around the outside until we start getting into the 1900s. And in the 1900s is where we're getting to the point at which what are effectively now Republicans are starting to realize, yeah, if our entire policy is make the rich get richer and screw the poor, people aren't going to vote for that really ever. We need a different way to get people to vote. And on its own, there's a lot of thought process that goes into that, and then we get into the 60s, really through the 90s, and we get the Republican Party coming together to gather all of this cultic miasma and form it into one thing. It starts with groups like the Moral Majority, which you may remember from politics in the 90s, you older folk like me, and other similar groups. And that gives rise to a loose organization that goes at the time period by effectively two names: evangelicalism, or for those who didn't want to be associated with a Christianese name, they also called it non-denominationalism. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say the exact same thing that I tell everybody when we talk about the non-denominational Christianity. Saying non-denominational Christianity is like saying non-denominational money. If it's not a denomination of the thing you're talking about, it's not part of the thing you're talking about, because the word denomination means part of the thing we're talking about. You can't be both things. Either you're a denomination with legitimate ties to the greater branch of universal, that is Catholic Christianity, or you're not. You can't be both of those things. It's a logical contradiction. So you wind up with a lot of these folks out here saying, we're non-denominational Christians. We believe it in our hearts, but we don't associate with everybody else, which, okay. One of the central points of Christianity is that we associate with everyone else. We come together in fellowship. We work together to better ourselves and the world around us. That's kind of the whole thing. If you're not doing that, what are you doing? And the answer, of course, we get is, what are you doing? What you're doing is modern political evangelical cultism. And that's where we wind up with the America that we have today, which is largely dominated by modern evangelical cultism, which is this whole miasma of cults that were kind of pushed together like a katamari of hell and made into a, at the risk of sounding like them, made into a false religion to serve political aims. And that's where we are today with this stuff. Now, it's all kind of come together into this thing, but it's also worth noting that what we have here in modern political evangelical cultism, it acts like a parasite. And I'm going to use this term very carefully, because while I have often used it to describe the way in which evangelical cultism works, I'm also very cognizant of the fact that in the past few years, political cultism, in particular Trumpism, have started to use it to describe basically everybody they don't like. So I want to be clear that I'm describing this in a very particular way and not using it as a dismissive insult to people who disagree with me. When I explain its operating principle as parasitism, I mean to describe the way in which, as this was formed since the 60s, it has become a cultural force. And because of its rooting in the culture, what has happened is that this whole mess has started to move back towards the main kind of bulk of Christianity through the culture, and has started to introduce itself into the mainstream religion. So now we find within otherwise traditional branches of Christianity, we find ourselves being effectively eaten alive from the inside. Pastors come to the pulpit to preach the gospel, and people say, yeah, but Trump said this, so I don't think I agree with that. And you're sitting at the pulpit going, I just read the words of Jesus. Why are you here? That's what that is. Evangelicalism is a cultural force leaching back in through the culture to effectively pollute the religion of Jesus Christ. It's an internal war. Some of you may have seen me post on Threads not too long ago. If you're wondering how they got so good at destroying and destructing and taking apart institutions from the inside, they've been practicing with the church for 30 to 50 years. This is what I'm talking about. They've been working this cultic stream of political motivation and greed that has been masquerading as a form of Christianity, has been going through the culture and taking root inside our religious institutions for generations. And now we find ourselves fighting it internally as much as anything, which is part of the reason we're seeing a lot of these denominational splits nowadays. I mentioned that with the ARC a while back. The Methodists just went through that with the UMC and the GMC, and this goes back a while as well. This is effectively where we get to now, the state of our denomination. For those of you who have kind of lost the thread a little bit, I'm going to go back here to where we were with the Reformed Church in America. And I'm going to point out that within the Reformed Church in America, there are a bunch of classes, which are regional bodies. There is among them the classis of New Brunswick, New Jersey, and for reasons that are far too complicated for me to get into now, but I will talk about in the later lesson on church structure, under the classis of New Brunswick, New Jersey, is unfinished community, which is us and us folk who are doing the things what we are doing now. We have officially gotten to our place in the history of the church. I see just by looking now back at the broadcast software, my theory of doing a half-hour lecture followed by a half-hour conversation is perhaps idealistic. I'm going to guess that since I tend to have a lot to say and a lot of information to communicate, these things are going to go longer, although our next lesson I won't have to explain how everything's working. At this point, I've covered everything. If you have, or at least everything we're going to cover today, I have to throw the caveat back in there that I have simplified greatly a large chunk of church history, including skipping over all of the just Catholic Church period. Oh my Lord, I've simplified a lot of things. There's more nuance to pretty much everything I've said, but where parts of this may be simplified to the point of wrongness, they are at least wrong, I hope, in a way that is helpful for you to understand the general arc of how church history has unfolded over time and how it has unfolded within the United States. Again, in as compact and simplified a way as I can do for this situation. So now that we're at the end, what's going to happen is our live stream is going to finish up here. I'm going to close that down. And I will be going over to the Discord server in our Christianity 101 voice video room. And there we're going to be having our follow-up conversation about this lesson, about anything you have questions on. Those of you who are following along who are not on the Discord server, come join us there for things. We do most of our stuff there anyway, but for this class in particular, we're going to be taking this stuff apart a bit more. We're going to be having conversations. We're going to be having inquiries. I will be present for this part of the conversation as well. And when our voice video conversation is over, there's also the text thread for this class as well on the Discord server where follow-up questions can still be asked. And again, those of you who are taking this as part of the new member course, I really want to encourage you, get in on the Google Classroom, do some of the assignments that are there. Those of you who are members of the church who took the previous new members course, feel free to do that too. You don't have to do the personal information part because we already have that, but be involved with this because this is going to go a lot deeper into the stuff that we covered in the new members course very quickly in the last batch. So again, I do really want to encourage you to stay involved, stay engaged with this. Our next, I'm going to try to be doing these, God willing, on the last Saturday of the month because of the shortness of February. The last Saturday of the month really wound up being the first Saturday of the month. But in general, my goal is to make the last Saturday of the month the Christianity 101 Saturday. But as I may need to adjust these dates, just please keep an eye on all of our outward-facing media. I'll be announcing it in Substack. It'll be printed in the bulletins on Sunday mornings. It'll be posted repeatedly on the Discord server. Please keep an eye on that for dates and that. And again, in the span between our monthly regular meetings, I am going to try to also release the next lessons, kind of the intermediate lessons, as just pre-recorded lectures or live streams without the conversational portion because they're just really going to happen whenever I have time. So the next one we're going to get into is a conversation on Bible translation, which hopefully will be released as a kind of a standalone lecture. And then at the end of March, we will do Bible translations to Clobber vs. Boogaloo as this kind of interactive lesson. So those of you who are following along, I'm going to end the stream now. I'm going to thank you for this. This live stream video is going to stay on the website. For those of you who weren't able to join us for the live, you can still watch the video and still come onto the server and still engage in the conversation via text. If you have any questions about anything, contact us there or just email me. I'm always happy to help with this stuff. Thanks again. I'm going to go ahead and peace out here, assuming I can remember what exactly I did here. I think I've got the right button here. Okay, God willing, I have the right button. I will see you all in the server in about a minute. Bye, y'all.